Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And so I had already talked about the first two that are on this list, the Greatest Generation and Baby Boomers. A little bit about Gen X and Gen Y, and the video actually talks about Gen Z as well, um, which doesn't even include the newest generation. The people who are Gen Z are just becoming teenagers now. So I'm not quite sure when Gen Z ends. I don't think that the children that have been born since 2015 are a part of Gen Z. But we don't necessarily have a name for them. It took a really long time for the Gen Ys to have a name and the Gen Xers to have a name. It used to be that it really wasn't towards the end of your generation that they came up with a name for them, but now it's become like a thing to help people to better articulate what are the defining characteristics of that generation, but it makes it really hard to know until that generation's been places, done things, had stuff happen. Um, so the Generation X, which is often called the MTV generation, and then certainly the Gen Ys, which most people know as millennials, but they're also called Gen I. That was actually a term that I kind of wish stuck. It suits the generation a little bit better. Um, Millennials technically include Gen Ys, although I'm technically a Gen Y and I'm not a millennial. So there's that piece of it, of exactly what years cover which generational groups. They may say different things and different references that you look at. Gen I um, is usually just after the millennials. So they're all a part of sort of that same group, but they may be subdivided later on. But millennials, we think of millennials as being sort of school-aged people, and clearly they're not. Many of you might even be millennials. But millennials are in the working world doing things. Certainly Gen Ys are, Gen X's have been doing things for a long time. The baby boomers are all of beginning in the retirement age. And so that just sort of gives you a general overview. There is some information later on in 2 slides from now, so down here, that we'll talk about. We'll go through that a little bit more. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of some context. So the video that was on the last slide, please do go and watch that because there's a lot of information about each generation that's in there. And like I said in the last video, it includes the things that were going on politically. They may include things like birth control was invented, which by itself is not a small thing because it created a sexual revolution. Women were able to sort of have more choice in choosing to have sex and expressing their sexuality rather than just waiting for marriage because they might be able to get pregnant at that point. And so really go through and look at the things that are defined in the video so that you can have a better understanding of what each of those are. All right, so what was going on for the greatest generation and how would that impact their view of work? So for them, certainly the Depression era was really the defining characteristic. And so anyone who got a job, that was something that you went into that job and you stayed in that job and you retired from that job. Clearly, that's not how the working world works now. In many places, they actually even encourage people to change jobs every 3 to 5 years. Um, when the greatest generation then went on and had children, I already talked in the last video about how that changed how they raised those children. But baby boomers themselves then invented the 70-hour work week. And so, what do the Gen Ys think about that? So, what do the children of the baby boomers think about their parents that were working the 70-hour work week? And so, with Gen Xers, what we saw were latchkey kids. So, those are kids that really were wearing their house key around their neck. That's how they got that phrase. Because parents were at work and the kids got themselves off to school, got themselves home from school. And that was pretty much how that worked. It really changed their relationship with grandparents because the baby boomers were now, especially women, were all off at work. And so many of them were babysat, watched by the grandparents, and so maybe had a closer relationship to them than baby boomers ever had because most of the time for the baby boomers, their grandparents had already passed at a pretty young age. And then, of course, so that was the Gen Xers. They were independent at a very young age. They were exposing themselves to, for example, MTV at a very young age, maybe things that today's parents might not let their kids watch. It impacted their personalities and work ethic in a really interesting way. They're very social, very independent, sort of thinking outside the box. Whereas Gen Ys, mostly because they were raised by their grandparents, tend to have these really interesting intergenerational ideas, and so some of this is covered on the next slide. So if we think of the Gen Ys, work is a means to an end. It's about fulfillment. Their interactive style is that they're participatory. They prefer email and voicemail opposed to direct and immediate interaction, although I will say Gen Xers more so have become a part of texting culture. Um, Messages that help to motivate. So your work will, you will work well with other bright and creative people versus do it your way and forget the rules. So again, those Gen Xers being very independent people versus the Gen Ys that really just want to work as a part of a team and as a part of a group. And so all of those are really different from what happened with this, they calling them veterans here, but with the greatest generation people, work and family, where never the two shall meet. And that is very different from the way that the working world is today, where most people are bringing work home, or they may check work text, work email, work phone calls on off hours. And so this is a really different view. And so if you have people in this group working with people in this group, you can certainly understand why there would be some interpersonal conflicts. And so that's all that I have for now.